Good evening. It's wonderful to see you all here tonight, and welcome to the latest LOL lecture. And my name is Nigella Hilgarth, and I'm the president of the New England Aquarium. And it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's proceedings. We can only do this lecture series with very generous support from the Lowell Institute, which allows us to put on free lectures about the oceans and ocean life for the public. So we're very excited about that and want to thank the Lowell Institute. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank some of the donors that have helped our Marine Conservation Action Fund and supported us being our Marine Conservation Action Fund Fellow here tonight to give the lecture. And so I want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the New England Biolabs Foundation, the Curtis and Edith Munson Foundation, and the Oak Foundation. And there are also many private individual donors that help support this amazing program. But I think probably the most engaged donor group is a simply amazing group and a model for women everywhere, which is Women Working for Oceans. And they call themselves W2O, which I think is probably the best name that I've ever heard for this. It's a Boston-based group. They work to inform folks about problems in the ocean, but also inspiring action and solutions on behalf of the oceans. So now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker. And Kerstin Forsberg is a wonderful example of the perfect person to do an MCAF project. In fact, her bio is really extraordinary. She has done so much for conservation. She's the founder and director of Planeta Océano, and as a social entrepreneur and a biologist, she's designed and developed numerous research and environmental education initiatives across Peru. And with Planeta Océano, she has promoted dozens of community-led environmental projects, fostering literally hundreds of citizen scientists, and she's engaged thousands of people in conservation. And to me, that's how you change hearts and minds, and change a country. And she's been invited to present, not only nationally, but at a lot of international events. And she's contributed to a lot of publications and biodiversity policy initiatives, actually changing policy in Peru, including the Peruvian Red List for Endangered Species and the Convention on Migratory Species. And she's presented at many environmental conferences on the environment, and also she's been a consultant for intergovernmental projects. And she's been recognized as a top, let me get this right, 30 under 30 social entrepreneurs by Forbes magazine. And she's received the World Wildlife Fund prize of the International President's Award, and the Ashoka Fellowship, the Peruvian National Environmental Citizenship Award, and the International Youth Foundation's Fellowship for Entrepreneurs. She is a 2016 Marine Conservation Action Fund Fellow, and we are so delighted to have her here tonight to discuss a very important work, conservation work saving the manta ray in Peru. So please join me in welcoming Kerstin tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nigella, Barbara, Elizabeth. Thank you to the New England Aquarium, to MCAF, to all of you that have come here today, this evening. Thanks for coming and joining us in celebrating marine conservation, because I think it's a real celebration every time we talk about marine conservation. And honestly, for me, it's an honor to be an MCAF fellow, and thank you for this very extremely hard week of intensive productivity. And actually, thank you also to the support. MCAF has been pivotal in what we have been doing with giant manta rays and with mobile rays, and what we're starting to do with sharks and rays in Peru. And I truly believe in the power of what MCAF and small grants can actually do to leverage the potential of communities involved in conservation. So I am actually humbled and honored, and thank you for selected us and included us in all this process within MCAF. So today I'm going to share with you a story, and within it several different stories of people that I've met throughout these last few years in which I've been engaged in marine conservation. And I'm going to talk a bit about the work that we've been doing to protect giant manta rays in Peru. So just to give you a brief overview of my country, I am Peruvian. I was born in Peru. I had the opportunity to live 5 years of my childhood in Canada, which I feel were significant to develop this environmental awareness in me since a very early age. And I returned to Peru, my home country, and as soon as I returned to Peru, I had always been passionate about marine environments, about nature. My very ever first kind of entrepreneurship was that I decided to do a small kids protecting animals at our local zoo, at our local school. We had a tiny little zoo, and I just got together with my teachers and tried to do what we could do to save these animals in the zoo. But then this 8-year-old, 7-year-old grew up, and I decided to study biology. I studied biology, and I live in Lima, which I can show you is around here. And while I was studying biology in 2007, I was told that there was a very large mortality of sea turtles in northern Peru, particularly in the Tumbes region, which is up here, which is basically what I'm going to talk about today. Most of my work is in northern Peru, which is the region bordering Ecuador. However, we work now across the coast of central and northern Peru. So this area is super important, and why? First of all, Peru is super important. We host the most productive marine system in the world through the Humboldt Current. This northern area of the country hosts the largest marine biodiversity in the country, including a lot of marine megafauna. It collides with important ecosystems. This is a biodiversity hotspot. It's terrestrial, but it's colliding. It's called the Tumbes Chocó Magdalena Biodiversity Hotspot. It's also bordering and shares ecosystems with an important area called the Eastern Tropical Pacific Seascape. For geopolitical reasons, Peru was not included. However, this is something that obviously we know that ecosystems don't have that type of border, right? And just recently, this area in northern Peru was declared a hope spot by Dr. Sylvia Earle's organization. So it's a very, very important area that for a long time had been abandoned and in marine conservation initiatives. So going back in time, it was 2007. I was finishing my undergraduate degree in biology. I was 22 years at that time. And I heard that there was this large sea turtle mortality. I got on a bus, drove my 18 hours up to Tumbes to start studying sea turtles, and saw that there was a big problem. So in the first month, I said, okay, why don't we engage volunteers? And I approached local universities, and in 1 month, we had over 100 local volunteers. We were patrolling beaches, identifying sea turtles, recognizing that they were stranding. We found over 260 dead strandings in 1 year. And I just started going there every month on my 18-hour bus to go engage these community members and work together towards sea turtle conservation. But the thing is that I found out very soon that sea turtles were like the tip of a huge iceberg. And there were many other things in which I should get engaged in, and we had to get engaged in overfishing, in pollution. So my sea turtle project finished, and I was like, I need to do something else. I need to continue with this. I had I had finished my university at the time. I was working as an environmental consultant. I said, I'm going to leave my job as an environmental consultant, and I'm going to form an organization. And obviously, everybody around me was like, you're crazy, you can't do that. But I did. And so I founded Planeta Océano together with this huge support by the local community that we had already built. And Planeta Océano is now growing into a model for marine conservation and for community-based conservation. We work with coastal communities to empower them in marine conservation. And we do this through 3 different action pillars. So the first is research. And when I talk about research, I'm not talking about bringing postdocs and PhDs. I'm talking about working with the true experts at field, which for us are the fishermen, are the youth, are the people that are there all the time and that can generate information that can lead to management. And I'll give you a bit of descriptions in a while. But this ranges from different projects, including shark and ray fisheries, which I'm very grateful for MCAF's support, because right now we're working together with fishermen and doing studies, including studies on reproductive ecology, that will help us propose size limits in order to reduce the amount of juveniles that are captured in Peruvian waters. This also includes, for example, working with young leaders in communities to determine occurrence of critically endangered sawfish or whale sharks, and based on that, determine conservation actions. Our second action pillar is marine education, and this is incorporating a new topic, basically, into the educational system. When I finished my sea turtle project, and I said, why are so many sea turtles dying? And I said, let's go to local schools and ask if they're teaching about sea turtle conservation. Ask if they're teaching about marine education. And guess what they said? No, we're not. These are schools that were looking at the ocean, like really literally facing the ocean, that their kids were future fishermen, and they weren't incorporating marine education topics into their schools. So we said, okay, let's incorporate it, but I don't want to just go and give a simple workshop. I want to go and make sure that marine education is sustainably incorporated into the school. So how are we going to do that? Through diverse strategies. First of all, we're going to come in with different approaches. Game-based approaches, nature-based approaches, connecting schools, having marine education transversally incorporated into the educational system. And second, we're going to build a network. And the network kind of works like this. We work as Planeta Océano with different partners, such as MCAF, for example. And we work with school representatives. And from there, we develop a committee. The committee works with schools along the coast of Peru, or northern Peru. They work with their teachers. The teachers work with the students in each school. And we connect the schools in different activities. And then we empower youth leadership, and I'm going to talk a bit about the Manta clubs that we formed at the end of my presentation, to go out to communities and really change and transform the communities. So this network has now over 50 schools that work in northern Peru. And based on our experience, we're now working with the Ministry of Environment and Education in order to develop a teacher's guide to formally incorporate marine education at last in the Peruvian educational system. And our third pillar of action, I talked about research and education, but our third pillar of action is sustainable development. And in this case, what we're talking about is in empowering leaders and entrepreneurs, and also engaging other aspects of economic development and fostering alternative livelihoods, such as, for example, ecotourism and community-based ecotourism. So as you can see, this model is quite transdisciplinary and also has a really big participatory approach. It puts people as the center and leaders of conservation, and they are the prime actors and stars of this conservation work. So this has fortunately received a lot of support throughout these years. For me, honestly, as a girl that started off just loving animals, it's the most humbling thing I can think of that our model is finally being recognized worldwide, and that I have the great luck to share this message along the world, to travel from Peru, to share this message to you, and learn from what's happening around the world, learn from what's happening here, and then take it back to my country. So, based on all this, I had been working on Planeta Océano, and in 2011, our Manta story began. So, I already knew about manta rays. I was already very fond of manta rays. And I'll just tell you a bit about these incredible species. So giant mantas are iconic flagship species, as we know. They're threatened worldwide. They are rays. They're very big rays, very smart rays. They are migratory. They can migratory, like I said, species, ecosystems don't have borders, so they can migrate from one place to another. In our case, the mantas in Peru are migrating between Ecuador and Peru, for example. And as with sharks and rays, they have a very slow reproductive periodicity. They have one pup each 2 to 7 years. They can reach sexual maturity at 7 to 10 years. So that means that extraction can quickly lead to overexploitation, and you have to really take care of these species. On the other hand, if we take care of them, they're marvelous species that can generate income for the low-income fishing communities that we work with, and that can be an indicator of ocean health and kind of lead people to really care about the marine environments in which they're embedded. So going back into the story, this is actually not me. It's a researcher called Andrea Marshall. She had been in Ecuador. She had been tagging giant manta rays. And she tagged this one called Humboldt. And Humboldt started migrating. Humboldt started migrating in direction towards Peru. Once it was migrating in that direction, it lost its tag. When it lost its tag, Andrea put out this post on Facebook. Please, do you know anybody that works in northern Peru that can help us find this tag? And so a friend of mine passed it to me, and I reached out and I said, of course, we can help you. So based on all this community support that we had already, we engaged our volunteers to just like put papers everywhere and say, who has found this tag? Can you please help? And guess what? A couple of days later, I received a phone call and says, we found your tag. So it was this fisherman who had the tag. Initially, he said that it had washed up onto coast. Now I can say that that might have been untrue. And initially, he thought that it was a bomb. However, he took it to his house and stored it there. Andrea had promised a reward, and so we gave him the reward that Andrea had sent. And we wanted to do a press release to show the importance of this action. And he asked us please not to do the press release because he didn't want his wife to find out that he had gotten the reward. So we didn't have any press release. But that made us start thinking even more on these majestic animals, which had actually been part of the Peruvian culture for ages. Mantas and mobudas and rays form part, and you can see them in pre-Inca ceramics. They have been part of our culture. But for some reason, they had become forgotten. And if you talked with a lot of people, they didn't even know that giant manta rays existed in the country. And lest did they know that they were consuming giant manta rays. So most of the manta rays that were harvested, and I'll talk to this in a while, were being consumed for local meat and local dishes. And even though it wasn't a resource that fishermen strictly depended on, and even though it wasn't a very continuous thing, even though it was regular in time, there wasn't a huge fishery for giant manta rays. Like I said at the beginning, just a bit of overexploitation due to the low reproductive patterns of these species can lead to threatening the population. So we approached fishermen, and this was actually the first photograph that I found. And sometimes I've had people literally say, like, I don't understand that photo, what is it? And I'm like, well, this is a huge giant manta ray that is being harvested. And the fisherman that gave us this photo, who's now a great friend of us, he's called Pablo Ruiz. Pablo said, I don't know what to do, because when I harvest giant manta rays, sometimes I find them with pups inside. And we started doing our research, and we started monitoring landings, and we started working together with two partners, which are Manta Trust and Wild Aid, in order to assess fishing and landings and start engaging coastal communities in marine conservation and manta conservation. So what we found was that there was a problem that had not been considered. There was extraction of giant manta rays. Like I said, it was not a huge deal. In 1 year, we found over 10 giant mantas being harvested. However, this could put this population at risk. A very important thing to consider here is that, remember I told you about Humboldt that had migrated into Peru? The area where Andrea was tagging her mantas is called Isla de la Plata in Ecuador. That area is known to have the largest documented population of giant manta rays in the world. If those giant mantas were migrating into Peru, in Ecuador, they were legally protected. Nobody could hunt them. But they were migrating into Peruvian waters. They were exposed to unregulated and unmonitored fisheries, and even pregnant females were being harvested. We found a pregnant female with a pup that was, according to our literature review, the largest grown pup or embryo that has been documented. So it's likely that this is also an important area related to reproduction of these species, and we needed to do something. So talking a bit about consumption and harvest, what we realized was two things. Mantas could be intentionally harvested, or, as mainly occurs, incidentally harvested and captured in bycatch through fishing gear. In the case of intentional harvest, as Pablo Ruiz told us, he could go out and maybe see up to 30 mantas, and in one season he could easily harvest up to 30 mantas in past years. And this comes to a very interesting thing about mantas in Peru, that in Isla de la Plata, they are found there only in seasons. We started identifying through our landings research that we could find mantas in Peru year-round, and this is something that we're proving more and more. So once the mantas were harvested, what happened? They were taken to this place that obviously doesn't have the best hygienic conditions, but what it does is they dry the meat and they salt it and they sell it out for local meat consumption of those dishes that I explained initially. The main problem, however, was the international trade. There's a large international trade for gill plates in the Asian market, which is found, there's a belief that gill plates can be used for medicinal purposes. However, research by our partners has shown that a manta is worth much more alive than dead. And in the case of ecotourism, for example, our partners showed as well that giant manta rays can provide over $140 million worldwide through ecotourism. In Ecuador, our neighboring country, mantas were estimated to provide over $2 million annually in ecotourism. And the fishermen in Peru were gaining less than $1 per kilo of manta. And this just contributed to poverty. So, based on what we had been finding, the vulnerability of this species, the ecological significance of the species, the fact that it was on the risk to be overexploited. It was just a matter of time before the international trade would think that there was an unmonitored, unregulated population, which happened to be shared with the largest population of giant manta rays in the world. So we put together this report, and this was done together with our staff members and volunteers, which are mainly young students and young professionals. And we gave it out to the government. And guess what happened? Nothing. So we continued with our work. We decided to go out from ports and start monitoring this population in water to see where the mantas were at what type of years and what other types of management actions could be done for this species. So we conducted, since 2015, we've been conducting on-board trips, 2 to 4 boat trips per month to selected sites along the Tumbes region in northern Peru to observe mantas. And based on this, we've been able to find critical visitation sites and also show that manta rays are indeed there all year round. We're also trying to develop photo IDs. So what is really cool about manta rays is that they have a unique spot pattern on their ventral surface. This is kind of like the fingertips. So every time you dive with a manta and you go beneath the manta, there's this beautiful manta flying around the water. You go beneath it and you take a photo of the ventral surface and you can identify what individual it is. Based on that, you can count the number of individuals and you can also see if you have any resightings or explore any connectivity between Peru and Ecuador. And I'm extremely delighted to say that we just recently found, out of our 30 plus photo IDs, that we have an individual that was seen in Peru and that has also been seen years ago in Ecuador, which proves this connectivity. So things didn't stop there, because we said, okay, how can we support ongoing monitoring for the population while supporting sustainable development of the coastal communities that live there? And that's when it occurred. Why don't we start doing a community-based ecotourism project that engages fishermen as manta ambassadors as opposed to manta hunters? So we went out to different fishermen and we did just a call and we said, who wants to work in this project? And what the project does is it supports fishermen to engage in ecotourism in different ways. We provide training from everything ranging from manta conservation to English to business management to ecotourism development. We provide financial assistance and technical assistance in order to formally incorporate their services and to equip their boats. So it's like really rustic boats, but they have really nice seats and really a really nice roof that you can go out with and enjoy a really nice day in the water with them. And go and see things like this, as opposed to a manta that has been landed in the floor. So we started engaging the fishermen. We had 2 groups of fishermen that had engaged with us in the project. We were providing these funds for them to develop. And we had our first success story. And this actually came to me by surprise. I received an email from a biologist that is called Jessica. So Jessica, she's a foreign biologist living in Peru. She emailed me and she said, you know what? I went out on one of your pilot ecotourism trips just recently. I had no idea about this. I went out with my family I saw whale sharks. I saw giant manta rays. It was the best day ever. It's incredible for me. She was so empowered that she decided to write an article. And she was emailing me to see if she could please post this article in a magazine worldwide. And I just felt honored. This is what we need. We need to empower communities and citizens to then speak by themselves and generate this multiplier effect. And that leads me to talking about Andy and Jorge. So these boys are boys of the local community. And we also told them, as part of our pilot boat trips, where we're engaging youth and local representatives, and we're taking out local teachers, we said, Andy, Jorge, do you guys want to come out and dive with mantas with us? And that's what they did. So they were really afraid at first. They didn't know what to expect. Till they found that. And they became our biggest manta ambassadors. They came back, there they are, just started engaging all their friends in the community, started painting these manta murals across town, and started talking to everybody of how that had been the biggest experience in their lives. So for us, experiences like Andy and Jorge are what really lead us to want to keep on driving change, and everybody can really be like Andy and Jorge, and like Jessica. And like Edgardo, that I'm going to tell you about in a minute. So we were working on that, and there was this huge giant manta ray that was captured, and that was on media attention, not just nationally, but worldwide. I don't know if anyone in the audience saw this, but it was an image that went global and viral. And it was a manta captured by a local fisherman called Edgardo Cruz, that, because he had captured this manta ray, was starting to be considered a villain in the community and worldwide. Edgardo was on his boat when this manta ray got tangled. He had no idea of how vulnerable it is, and he was there all day long. They had not captured anything with his son, and they decided to take it back to land. When he was taking it back to land, he phoned one of the people that were going to buy the manta meat, and he thought that he was going to earn $4,000 for that giant manta, which weighed over a ton. When he got to land, it was so heavy that they had to lift it up with a crane. And when everything was there, he was waiting for his $4,000, and the person came up to pay him and gave him $100. He had gone through so much effort and was a low-income fisherman, and worse, was considered as a villain. Media attention worldwide, and media attention in Peru, and the local press saying, wow, this is a monster. This is a species that's super rare to Peru. How did they do that? It's incredible that they fished such a large individual. And Edgardo, the only thing he could do was stay in his room, shut down all his doors, throw away his cell phone, because he didn't want anybody else to contact him. But somebody else contacted him, and that was us. So we reached out to Edgardo, and we said, Mr. Cruz, we want to work with you. We don't want to be against you, we want to work with you. And we want to invite you to be part of this project. So would you please join us in being part of this project? And I'm happy to say that Edgardo Cruz, I talked about 2 teams of fishermen, is now our 3rd team of fishermen. And he's now the most passionate manta conservationist ever, leading manta conservation trips. And he tells you, if this continues to launch, I want to stop being a fisherman. I just want to dedicate myself to manta conservation and manta ecotourism. So for me, this giant manta, even though it was the most unfortunate situation ever, served as a kind of hero. A hero that led us to meet Edgardo, but that also led us to more media attention. So we went out on media, and I went on media, and I said, you know what? What the media has said, that this species is rare, is false. We see it all the time. It's part of the largest population of giant mantas. What the media said that it's a monster, it's false. It's a completely harmless species. And you know what? We presented a proposal to the government 3 years ago, which never received any attention in order to legally protect this species in Peru. So I cordially invite the Vice Minister and the Minister to get in contact with us, to work with us together to legally protect giant manta rays. And so I received a phone call the day after by the Vice Minister, and he said, we want to work with you. And based on that, we started developing, together with the fishermen, together with the local authorities, a proposal to legally protect giant manta rays in Peru. But the thing is that this legislation passed through several offices. So as it passed through several offices, sometimes it reached new hands, and the new hands didn't know about the importance of giant manta rays. And we frequently received responses as, but you know what? It's impossible for local fishermen to capture these giant individuals. They have too small of a boats. And we said, no, it's not impossible. They are usually incidentally caught. They can also be intentionally caught, but it's not impossible for them to take these back to land. And what's worse is that we're losing a huge ecotourism opportunity, a huge development opportunity for our communities. And what's even worse is that giant manta rays form part of a list called CMS, which is a Convention of Migratory Species. And in this list, our country had signed that it would legally protect the species. So I'm saying, what are we waiting for? So I was very, very lucky that after months of work and great collaboration with the Peruvian authorities and government, and extremely incredible leadership by some of the Peruvian authorities, on December 31st of last year, just before the year was finished, manta rays were legally protected in Peru. So now it is illegal to harvest, consume, commercialize this species. And it just is the first step, though. It's the first step in order to build community engagement for the species. And that's what we've been working on these last few years. And now, this is the best thing ever for me. I just came back, before I was coming here, this is a parade with over 200 kids in northern Peru. And for me, it's incredible. A species that was previously overlooked is now becoming the main flagship species for a location. A sense of pride. The kids had invented a song about giant manta rays. No te pases de la raya, cuidemos la mantarraya. That's what they were singing along it. They were dancing the song of the manta ray. And this flows throughout the community. There's still so much to do. That's a teacher that's going out and watching one of the giant mantas. And we have eco clubs. The eco clubs and this network that I talked to you about initially, we're leveraging on the power of that network in order to do manta clubs now. So we have children doing youth-led initiatives and going out to their communities in order for their communities and the fishermen to join them in manta conservation. There's still a lot to do, though. It's still at the beginning of the process. There's still more people to engage. And mantas are these marvelous flagship species. But once again, as the sea turtles that I talked about initially, they encompass this wide range of opportunities and challenges that our oceans face. And for me, that's the real reason behind my work. I love manta rays, I love sea turtles, I love sawfishes, I love everything that I work with, but what I really want is for people to start looking at the ocean and to start engaging in the ocean. And ultimately, because of that, become environmental citizens and start connecting with one another. So now when somebody asks me about Planeta Océano, I could define it in multiple ways. I could define it as, this dream that this 8-year-old that with her zoo and in her school was thinking of. I could define it as this just crazy passion that I work on every day. And what I usually tend to define it is as a participatory platform, because it's a movement. And it's a movement of thousands of people, thousands of community members, hundreds of teachers, of children, of youth, of governmental officials, of companies that combine and that work together in order to contribute to marine conservation and sustain coastal communities. So before I finish, I'd just like to thank you for being here. I'd like to thank all the team members and community members that are involved in this. I just feel honored to be able to be with you here, so far away from our home, and be representing all these people. That's the greatest honor for me. And thank you to all our large supporters that make this work possible. And without it, this 22-year-old embarking on this huge mission wouldn't have been able to get there. So on behalf of all the communities that we work with, thank you, and we invite you to continue following our work. Thanks. So their lifespan in the wild, actually, because these species, little is still known about them, this is just approximate, it's thought that they can be older than 50 years old. So they reach sexual maturity between 7 and 10, and they get up to there. Their weight can, in some cases, be over 2 tons, which is very big. When they are small, they would be kind of like I'd say like a mobula ray, perhaps, which is kind of like a family of that, which are smaller individuals. And it would be a few dozen kilos. So they're much smaller, but they'd be kind of like this size. Thanks. Yes, hi.
At the age of the migratory season, what's the average population size for giant mantas off the coast of Peru?
Right. So, sorry? Oh, okay, yes. So the average population size of giant manta rays in Peru. And that is a very difficult question to answer, and I hope that I will be able to answer it in a few years when we have more research. The way that you can identify population size, truly, one of the ways that we're doing it is through photo identification of the individuals. The thing about photo IDs is that you have to be, especially in northern Peru, where the waters are so rich and sometimes have limited visibility, you have to be really lucky to get the photo ID and have the place at the right time. So we can be seeing tons of mantas, but that don't necessarily have a photo ID, and therefore our number of sightings in one day can be up to 15 sightings of mantas, but we can just confirm one photo ID that we've taken that moment. In the time that we've been working since the beginning of 2015, we have over 35 photo IDs individuals. However, the population in Ecuador has over 650 IDs. They have been working in this for many years before us, and we are studying more the connectivity between the ones in Peru and the ones in Ecuador, even though they're very close to each other. So we're assuming that there is a very high connectivity and that several of those 650 are migrating into Peruvian waters. Yes, hi.
Does their markings change over time at all from a juvenile standpoint to an adult?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
The markings underneath, will that change over time at all from a juvenile to an adult?
So usually they'll maintain the markings, like you maintain your fingerprints, they'll maintain the photo IDs. I'm actually not 100% sure about fetuses and how they develop because study is very limited, but usually it will maintain its coloration.
What was the biggest challenge you faced in engaging the local community? Were there people who were really against what you were doing? Was everyone just really excited about this concept?
Sure, and that's a really good question. And what I would say is that luckily we have always received very positive attention. And the reason behind that is that, and this is something that I told Elizabeth and she likes me to say it, which is that we are not activists, but we are engagers. So we do not go up to communities and force them into thinking something. We approach fishermen and we tell them, what problems are you facing? How can we work on this together? So when we were starting to work with, for example, the giant manta rays, or we started to work with the schools, we approached them and asked them if they were seeing mantas and what they thought about it, or the schools, like, how can we support you? And that kind of leads to a sense of ownership because people really want to feel part of this change. But of course, as in everything, you'll find people that are more engaged than others, or people that, even though you have a really good communication strategy, just prefer to not believe. And in those cases, although extremely limited, what we've preferred to do is just work with those people that really want to be with us. So in the case of our Manta ecotourism, a lot of people ask me, like, how did you select the fishermen that you work with? And I actually say, like, they selected themselves because we have several workshops and the people that come again and again and again will be the ones that will receive further support and attention from us. So that's how we build it.
Being oceanic species, do you think that they migrate any further than Ecuador?
Yes.
Has anyone, for example, made connections with individuals in Revillagigedos?
Yes. So that's a very good question as well, and it is possible. One of the things that is underway right now, not by ourselves, but that mantas are being tagged in Galapagos as well by our partners in order to study the movements. We definitely would want to later conduct tagging and genetic studies to further refer this to other areas. However, studies by some of our partners have also shown that even though they are migratory species, they can have a fairly reduced migration range. So that would mean that it could be that the main site is between Peru and Ecuador for this particular population, but it's definitely a question that we have to continue answering. And that's why I was saying it's not finished here. There's so much more work that we need to do. Yes.
Are there any plans in the works through local governments or even the communities to further build resources for people from out of the country to come, such as hotels or restaurants or things like that? Is that something that you're looking toward?
Sure. Can you repeat that, Kerstin? Oh, sorry. I'm forgetting about repeating questions. I had to repeat my question. Sorry. So yes, you asked if there are further resources or plans in order to build this ecotourism more, like through hotels and through partnerships. And yes, indeed, our work and in the years to follow, our project is focused specifically on that, on building that community support, on developing partnerships between the Fishermen Association and hotels and the government and organizations worldwide in order to build this. It also includes engaging the community more, because it's not 3 isolated fishermen or 3 groups of isolated fishermen, but it has to be a whole community around this. So yes, and I think that that's a very important component of the work, because you could simply do the legislation or simply do the education or give them the money, and it has been proven in other areas that if you don't have that system support, then it won't be successful. So we're definitely working very hard on getting that system support going. And the government is really excited, which is good. Okay, one more question, but I'll be outside having cookies and lemonade, right?
That's right, yes. Thank you, that's what I was trying to say.
Yes, sorry.
That's great, she's good. Yes, exactly.
Stock has improved. If they're off doing ecotourism, they're catching less of the natural fish stock. Has that been a byproduct of this at all?
Sure. So actually, this project is still at a very early stage. So we are just starting with the pilot ecotourism boat trips. We haven't even formally launched the ecotourism services, which we hope to do soon, and all of you are invited to come to Peru and swim with mantas. But that is definitely an indicator that we are considering, as well as indicators, like socioeconomic indicators for fishermen and for the population. An important thing to note, however, is that we do not expect fishermen to stop fishing, and it brings us down to this kind of engaging strategy in which we're not against fishing at all. We just want sustainable fishing. So that will come together with further projects that I hope that can be developed further on. But it's definitely something that's been considered.